All right, a very good evening to everyone tuning in from their homes via Facebook. A very good evening to everyone. My name is Ritmika Karunadara. I'm here on behalf of YMCA Sri Lanka and the Road Track Club of Colombo East. You are joining us with Better Why, an initiative organized by these two organizations with great incentives in mind. Let me go into a little description about the two institutions and what this project is. First of all, Better Why. Better Why is a joint project organized by the Rotary Club of Colombo East in partnership with the YMCA Sri Lanka, focusing on addressing important issues concerning the youth of our country, such as education, mental health, political participation, unemployment, etc., etc., and the role the youth can play in alleviating such issues. Now, the YMCA has a long history of working with the youth and in the field of youth development and has always found itself at the forefront of tangible change. In Sri Lanka, its history can be traced back to 1882, 138 years to date, and the National Council has provided leadership and societal change since 1962. Likewise, the Rotary Club of Colombo East is the premier Rotary Club in the country, chartered in 1989, and has built a reputation of finesse and articulated action as a youth-led social service and self-actualization platform par excellence. A little bit of more information about YMCA and their interaction with the subject we have at hand this evening. The YMCA has been working and bettering and working towards and bettering the lives of the differently abled for many decades in Sri Lanka. The YMCA Sri Lanka, through YMCA Batiklo, owns and manages one of the premier schools for the hearing impaired in Sri Lanka called Valvosai, and was a pioneer in offering standardized education instead of vocational training for the differently able. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the topic we have for discussion this evening, which is accessibility because disability is non-existent. Now, what does this mean? We're talking about humanity. We're talking about people. We're talking about people who are differently abled. Now, society in itself functions with the goals of productivity, efficiency, and growth. And once we prioritize these concepts in everyone's lives, we tend to forget something that is very important to every single one of us, which is our morals and our humanity. We as a community, we as a civilization, we work together to make sure that everyone can live happily. And I think this conversation we're about to have with two exceptional individuals, two exemplar individuals, will be something that everyone can learn from. This is a cause that requires the youth to voice their opinions upon, because it's something that is not talked about amongst a lot of people, because it's not something that can be glorified via social media. It's not something that can be constantly harped on and made advertisements about. No, it's not. But this is something we have to all commit to in order to make tangible change in the world we live in. Let me go on into introducing the two exemplar individuals who will be joining us this evening for this conversation about accessibility because disability is non-existent. First of all, as you can see on the screen yourself right now, Mr. Ishan Jalil. He's the director and executive board member of Ashinsa. Mr. Ishan Jalil is a graduate from the University of Colombo Faculty of Arts with a special BA honors degree in international relations, being the first blind person to do a major in that subject. From a young age, he aspired to be a great and exemplar individual in our society. He also obtained a diploma from Bandaranaike International Diplomatic Training Institute in 2016, titled Diploma in Diplomacy and World Affairs, with a special distinction. Having 10 years of experience in the development sector, Mr. Jalil is a campaigner for disability and youth rights, which is reflected by his many endeavors as the president of Young Voices Sri Lanka, a project administered by Leonard. Cheshire Disability UK from 2010 to 2014 as an alumni of the US Department of State under the International Visitor Leadership Program since 2014, and as a former National Inclusion Advisor, International Foundation for Electoral Systems from May 2016 to December 2019. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Ishan Jalil. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your life to be with us here and enlighten the youth about their responsibility towards the cause of the greatness of our humanity. Thank you so very much for being with us this evening, Mr. Ishan. We are still awaiting our second guest for this evening. I will give you his introduction, and once he arrives at our discussion, we will welcome him with warm welcomes, of course. Mr. Janit Rukmal. Mr. Janit Rukmal is an ardent personality who co-founded Enable Lanka Foundation, which is a network of young professionals spearheading the mainstreaming of disability inclusion in Sri Lanka, while serving as a translator cum interpreter to the President of Sri Lanka. He is also an advisor on youth and inclusion at the International Youth Alliance for Peace. He also serves as a member of the Technical Working Group on Disability Inclusive Elections with the Election Commission of Sri Lanka. Being a multiple degree holder in software engineering and languages, and languages bachelor degrees respectively in the Informatics Institute of Technology and University of Sri Jayewardenepura, he is currently reading for his Masters in Development Studies and Public Policy, conducted by the Magra Institute and Open University of Sri Lanka. Once Mr. Janit Rukmal attends our meeting, we will be able to welcome him with open hands, of course. Once again, I want to thank um Ms. Dian Selvamara for transmitting this entire segment for everyone in our viewing audience. Thank you so very much, ma'am, for being with us this evening. All right. I'm going to move into the Q&A now. We're going to start off with our initial remarks, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ishan Jalil to answer this question, which will be his way of opening the conversation about accessibility, because visibility is non-existent. Now, the first question we have on the question panel, on the question board this evening, is what is the concept of accessibility and why is it important to the differently abled community? Mr. Ishan, if you could make your opening remarks along this question.
Yes, so thank you so much, Rotary Club of Colombo East and YMCA for giving me this great opportunity to attend a timely discussion, because right now we are in the middle of a critical situation, like the COVID pandemic is, threatening all of our lives, like because of the whole vaccination process and everything. So COVID is a huge challenge. And amidst this pandemic situation, persons with disabilities are the most neglected community, if I may say so. So to answer your question, what is the concept of accessibility? Let's, instead of using very flowery language, let's just talk about it in very simple terms. What is accessibility? I'm a blind person. I was born blind, right? So if I can, like, say there's a school where there's a lift, but on the lift there are no braille markings. Like, I don't know whether you know braille. Braille is the sign. Braille is the sign language which is used by blind persons. Like, it's the written language. It's used by blind persons. So there are no braille markings on a lift. So that is a barrier for me to know as to which floor I have to go to, and like what are the buttons that I can use. I can, like, say if I want to press a certain button to go to the second floor, but there are no braille markings. So then I won't know exactly how to navigate myself. So that is a very basic notion of accessibility. Accessibility is all about your ability to go about doing your daily activities. Just, as like the very simple things like going into an office building, going to a school, or, like walking on the road. Your ability to do those things without any hindrance, or without any major obstacles. So that is accessibility in very simple terms. So what we are talking about today, and why we are talking about today, is because there's a major lack of accessibility in Sri Lanka. I can talk about this whole topic for, not just 1 hour, but for like one whole day. But the thing is, because of time constraints, I'll just keep it very simple, and just I'll limit my speech and I'll make it very brief. But then accessibility is something felt not just by me, a blind person, but there are so many other people who are physically impaired. And I know the person who's translating this session, she has great experience in, like great experience in how accessibility is a challenge for deaf persons, right? So, and also there are people who are mentally challenged and also intellectually challenged. So they also have serious issues concerning accessibility. So I will elaborate those issues later on in the discussion. But accessibility is when you can do your daily duties, your daily work, and overall you can do like whatever you like, uh, the way you want it, rather than going through so much of barrier. That's accessibility.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. When Mr. J. Rukmal has been able to join us, Mr. Rukmal, if you could unmute your mic.
Hi, I hope
Hi, Mr. Rukmal. Thank you. Thank you so very much for being with us this evening. I was able to to read out your bio to everyone who is watching us right now on Facebook Live. I just wanted to, on behalf of the organizing committee and everyone who is watching this session right now, thank you so very much for being with us this evening. We moved on into the first segment of today's conversation, which is the initial opening remarks for today's topic of conversation. I'll just reread the question again for you, and we can start off today's conversation by answering this question. What is the concept of accessibility, and why is it important to the differently abled community?
um, actually that's a very timely question because in fact uh, last week the world celebrated the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I hope Kishan may have touched upon this as well, but now that this conversation is so crucial to Sri Lanka, let me sort of reiterate. And also, you mentioned the other keyword, differently able.
Jani, excuse me, Jani,
Yes,
it's hard to hear you.
Yes, Mr. Janet, I think there's some, you think you should talk a little louder, or maybe the mic, there's something must be wrong.
Let's just, yeah,
can you hear me now?
It's still a little
still,
faint.
yeah.
Let me see something. How about now?
It's still the same, but
Still
a
the
little
same.
better, but it's
Yeah.
still the same, Mr. Janet. Is there any way we could we apologize, dear viewers, for the technical difficulties that come about. These things cannot be avoided, and we have no control over them. So we apologize sincerely. I hope you will bear with us. Um, until Mr. Janit Rukmal returns, I think we're just going to move on to the next question, and we'll hear from Mr. Ishan, and then we'll move on to Mr. Janit once he's able to fix the issue from his end. All right, let me move on to the next question. The second question for today's discussion is: education is important to everyone. As someone who has been the first blind person to complete a major on the subject of international relations, what is your take on the access to education for the differently abled, and how can it be improved to enable total accessibility? Mr. Ishan.
Thanks, Ritmaka, for raising that question. Uh, I'll tell you a few details, like I'll share a few details with you about my personal experience in terms of education, like access to education, right? So I went to a few schools, like I went to President's College Maharagama initially, and that was a school which had, like, they had no training to teach a disabled kid, so or like differently able kid, so they received me with open arms, but they were not able to accommodate me the way I wanted to be accommodated, right? So they did not have the facilities, the necessary facilities. And then I went to blind school Rakpala. I'm pretty sure most of you know that place. So
Yes.
I studied up until O levels there, until 2005, and that was a school dedicated for people like me, that is blind students and students with low vision, right? So they, of course, they had made sure that accessibility is fully practiced and implemented in the school. However, there were certain issues. Now, say for instance, in terms of books, right? let's say if we are supposed to refer to science books or maths books, uh, the braille versions come as embossed volumes, like because the braille letters are large. Like if any of you know, braille letters are quite large, so you can't just like print the whole book in just one, like in just one go. Like it has to be embossed in several volumes. So there were many instances where we had to face this thing, science, maths, English, all these key subjects. Many braille volumes were missing. This might sound a bit, technical or maybe a bit funny, but then that's actually what happened. Like, there were many missing volumes which are like, which were not accounted. So like, we did not have access to those books, but then thanks to our teachers, we were able to, complete our education without any hindrance. And then to do my A levels, I went to St. Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia. Uh, that was a very unique case, if I may put it that way. St. Thomas's, of course, as all of you know, is a very privileged school in Colombo, and also they welcomed me with open arms. They welcomed me, and they wanted me to get a very good education in that school. However, they were not used to having a blind person studying in that school. So many people, like authority figures, told me, Ishan, do these subjects, don't do these subjects, so on and so forth. Because I chose to do economics, Greek and Roman civilization, and English as my subjects. And many people told me, Ishan, don't do economics because it involves a lot of graphs, charts, diagrams, uh, tables, etc., etc. So that itself was a biggest, like a very huge obstacle in accessing the subject that I like, because economics is something which I really liked at that point. So I was told not to do economics. But then, thanks to a very dedicated teacher who taught economics at the time, Mrs. Janita Piris, she just made sure that I, like, even though I can't see the diagrams, charts, tables, and all that, she just made sure that I can feel it. Like, she used to kind of uh, designs, like she used to create certain shapes on papers, and she gave me touch and feel those, like, those things, such as diagrams, tables, etc. Right? So for A levels, that was one major issue, like economics. So there was no accessible material, but it was only possible because of that teacher. And also for all the other subjects as well, I did not have books to read. Like, all my other peers, all my other friends, college guys, they were able to read whatever the books that they were supposed to read. But then I did not have access to a single book. I depended on the notes given by the class teacher. That's all. That's all that I did. And then the situation was not different even at Colombo University as well. Even though I'm sad to say that it is sad to say, even at Colombo University, for the 4 years that I was there, for the 4 years that I studied there, I did not have access to a single braille book or even an accessible e version of any book for that matter, in terms of international relations or the other elective subjects that I did. So even there, even at Colombo University, I depended on the notes given by the lecturers, and also my friends, like really helped me out a lot. So that's how that's how I got to university, right? So yeah, like that's my story. Like that's my personal story in terms of access to education. Like what I have to say is, I am privileged enough to be in Colombo and to get certain opportunities because one thing, I still have a very good support system. Like those days, my parents, especially my dad, he always used to guide me, wherever I wanted to go. He always stood behind me whenever I needed him. And also my mom always like constantly encouraged me to go on and to study and like to pursue whatever I like, like to pursue my passion. But then that is not the story when it comes to many persons with disabilities. Access to education. Now, say, like, there are instances which are reported where a student, like a child who is basically uh, like who is supposed to go to school, who is in school going age, is refused entry to a school because of his or her disability. So is that a problem with that child? I beg to differ, because the disability actually is not with the child, but the disability is created because of the circumstances. If the school was accessible, if the school, now say, let's talk about a case where a wheelchair user, a child who is a wheelchair user, is looking to go to a school, and that school refuses entry to the child, saying that they don't have the facilities. That's not the child's problem. That's their problem. They need to solve those problems. So access to education uh, can occur in many shapes and forms. So I am just one person who has gone through so much in terms of lack of accessibility. And I'm pretty sure Janitha, who is a great campaigner for disability rights, has his own story to share, because I know him like for the past 15 years. I know him, I know his story. I'm pretty sure he also will have a very unique story to share about how access to education, at certain points, hindered him, and at certain points, he was able to overcome those issues. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Ms. Rukma, can we please check your mic?
Yeah, I suppose
Ah,
now it's very well.
we can hear you
Yes,
amazingly.
we
Thank
can
you.
hear.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
We'll start off the conversation with you, Mr. Rukmal, with the first question and the second question. So it can be maybe a hybrid question if you'd like to call it that.
Yeah.
So, what is the concept of accessibility? Why is it important to the differently abled community? Question number two: education is important to everyone. As someone who has been the first blind person to, I know that is for Mr. That was for Mr. Ishan, but then again, Mr. Janit, we're talking about education and the differently able not having proper access to it. So how can accessibility as a whole improve in Sri Lanka? That is what we want to talk about with the second question, Ms. Janet.
Okay. I think actually I can take it up as a hybrid question. Uh, First, uh, the concept of accessibility, how I interpret it in a sense, right? So uh, I know we are just 2 weeks sort of behind, or we just celebrated the Global Accessibility Awareness Day on the 20th of May this year. Uh, if people, some of you might know this already, that it's globally celebrated. And so the reason why accessibility needed awareness is what we have to talk about when we talk about the concept of accessibility. So there's, if we break that word into two, it's access and ability. So on the one hand, uh, we talk about the access. We talk about how a person can reach the full and equal potential and the level of full and equal participation in equal basis with others because of their because of the environmental barriers, as well as the specific condition or because of which they uh, find it difficult to access those. facilities, services, or whatever. So, in my understanding, accessibility is something that covers all these aspects. So, it has something to do with the person and the environment, and there's one other factor, the attitude, because there can be imperfect people, of course. There can be imperfect environments, definitely. And if we have a perfect attitude that can bridge these two things, that is one way to make accessibility possible. And that is my own sort of interpretation into accessibility, because Ishan is one person I know in Sri Lanka who has succeeded in bridging all the hurdles that the barriers that the environment has thrown at him through good attitudes with him and the people around him. So he described and he talked about it earlier. So even in my case, it's the same. And let's move on to the education part, where I would like to sort of uh, recount some of the experiences that I went through in education. So mine is comparatively a better case study, I suppose, because I actually did not have to go to a residential school specialized for visually impaired persons, blind or visually impaired persons. I started my sort of primary education in Maliyadeva College, Kulnagala, and then I was able to study in Ananda College, Colombo. So that's where I finished my schooling and went on to become a graduate from the University of Sri Jawadanapura, and I earned my master's later. So, uh, considering all that, throughout that journey, actually, rather than the environment or the imperfections, one might call that I had, uh, it's the attitudes that mattered, because when I was being admitted to my first school, there were a lot of issues like how can a school like this accommodate a person with a visual impairment. So there was so many odds against it, as well as so many positive people who were backing me there, because on the one hand my father was relentless as an old boy of the school. He was trying to say like, we will do the best from our end as parents to make sure that his education experience in the school is smooth and flawless. And uh, and he made sure that the zonal education office is aware of me in that school, so that they would send an integrated teacher to sort of support and oversee my education. And thanks to that attitudinal uh, positivity, I was able to mingle with uh, other students who did not live with any disability at the time. So I didn't feel any special there. So I fought my fights, and I had my disagreements. I was very mischievous, of course, and teachers were scornful at me just as they would be for any other person. So the crux of the matter is that education was a hard journey, but it was achievable. And one key instance I remember is when I was proposed as a suitable person for a leadership position in school. They said, "How can a blind person, I mean, work this out?" So, I mean, although I was turned down at that instance, some few years later, I was able to achieve the same position due to a teacher who had a positive attitude. So same happened in the university. I have a different experience to that of Ishan, because I remember both of us went to the university around the same time. So he was initially given an opportunity to go to University of Sri Jawadanapura, but his interest was on international relations, and he took a friendly exchange to University of Colombo, while I remained at the University of Sri Lanka because my interests were more along the lines of languages, and Jawadanapura could accommodate that. So at that time, I mean, there was one main hurdle that I came across, just as similar to Ishan's, which is the lack of access to resources, such as books, such as, I mean, texts that we were prescribed. So when I mentioned that to the head of department in our faculty, so what she said was, um, no, you will be definitely accommodated, and it is our responsibility to make sure that you get the resources that you want. So as a result, they've paid more attention to establishing a talking book library or an audio book library as well as a braille book library, and they acquired a braille printer for the university, which is still functioning to date. And for the first time in the university history, the students with visual impairments were given opportunity to sit for examinations using computers rather than the typical method of uh, writing the question answers in braille and having it translated by someone, which takes a lot of time and which is comparatively unreliable in contrast to using a computer, typing it out and printing it for the direct reference or direct examination of the examiners. So that was pretty much my journey in education, and that has a lot of lessons about the attitude, how attitude has the potential to change the sort of the ability part in the accessibility. The word accessibility, there's a there's the part ability. So this ability is fashioned by the attitude. So that is the kind of experience I can impart, how education can be facilitated with the right kind of attitude. So let's talk about more in the next segment.
Mr. Rukma, Mr. Jalil, we are receiving a question from the audience. The audience wants to know, is it possible that schools refuse to admit children into their schools because of financial restrictions and the cost thereof? What is your response to this?
May I
Mr.
take it up?
Jalil? Yes, you can, Mr. Rukma.
Yes.
Okay. So that has a theory actually. There is something called the cost of disability. So people say it is costly to implement these things, um, and that's the whole myth surrounding this concept. And my solution would be that if the schools, if you look at many schools in the country, renovation happens at least once every 5 years. That is a
Yes.
solid fact, right? So throughout this renovation, only what they have to do is think about a scenario where a person who has accessibility needs will have to be admitted to this school, and what would he or she want in this school to be placed. So it's no brainer to factor that set of needs into the budget and conduct the renovations accordingly. So every building at the end of the day will be accessible by the time. I mean, there's a concept called progressive realization. So this progressive realization means you take one tiny step at a time and make it accessible. So just as you come across a student, rather than turning him or her down, the wise decision would be to take him or her, just like in Ishan's case, the President's College in Maharagaman, they were willing to take him in. And then only they realized it's difficult and they could have diverted that student to the proper channels. So there are different kind of students with different needs. Say, I mean, if the classrooms are upstairs and that student is using a wheelchair, so that's definitely a difficult situation. But definitely there are sort of lower ground floors in the school, which the classrooms can be shifted. So that is the whole idea about making things accessible. That's where the attitude comes. So rather than looking at the cost that it takes, we have to look at the positive ways we can mobilize in order to make it happen.
Like building a ramp, can be a very simple step. or like, something like that.
Yes, Mr. Jalil.
Definitely, Isha.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Thank you, Mr. Rukma. That was a very informative answer. And I actually learned something out of it. This word I've never heard before, progressive realization, something the youth watching this discussion should definitely take note of and think about more deeply, because it does unravel a lot of realizations once you actually think about the word progressive realization. Thank you so much, Mr. Rukma, for that insightful answer. The third question we have for our panelists today. An example of government policy lagging behind in Sri Lanka is driving licenses for the hearing impaired. What other similar primitive legislature and retrograde policies exist in Sri Lanka, and how can our youth advocate for change? Who would like to answer this question, Mr. Rukman, Mr. Jalil?
Shall I
Isha.
take it first?
Please,
Yeah.
please, Isha. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is a very interesting question. Like this talks about government legislation and like what has been going wrong for so long, uh, and why we need to correct it and how. So I'll give you a very uh, well-known example among the blind community, and also this may affect a lot of other disabled persons as well. Voting rights. Right? So like for like as far as voting rights are concerned, it is clear, like according to the constitution of the country and according to all the regulations in place, all persons who are over 18 and who are registered are eligible to vote. However, when a blind person wishes to exercise his or her right to universal franchise, they go through so much. I'll tell you the process, like because I have been an active voter like since 2007 2008. I have been voting at each and every election, so I know how this process works, and I know that even Johnny knows this whole process. Firstly, you have to talk to your Gram Ladari, and then you have to get a certain form, and then you have to take that form and fill certain details, like it's a disability form, like stating your disability and so on. And in that form, there's a section where a government registered medical doctor needs to certify that you're actually a person with a disability. Like in terms of people like us, that you're actually a blind person. So, the like as far as I'm concerned, what I had to do is I had to go to this doctor and get the certification and then give the form back to the Gramin Ladari so that he will issue a certain document which I can take to the polling station on election day, right? That is, if I want to take someone, like if I want someone to accompany me in the voting process, like that is someone that I trust. And so that person will vote on behalf of me, right? That is the only uh, like the only way right now, like the only possible way that a blind person can vote, as far as taking another person, like if they want, like say for instance, there are two ways to vote for a blind person. One is you can just go without any of those procedures. You can just go to the polling station. You can tell the SPO that you want to vote, and then the SPO will vote on behalf of you in front of another officer, a polling booth officer. But just imagine being a blind person, how can you trust whether this person is actually voting on behalf of you? Like if I want to vote for party X, and if the SPO votes for party Y, how would I know? Right? So as a solution to that problem, They have introduced this system where I can take someone whom I trust, and that person can cast the vote on behalf of me. But that too is a very degrading practice because I'm a citizen, I'm a human being, I'm a conscious voter. So in all the and in all those contexts, why can't I use my right to vote as an independent citizen, as a free man? Why do I have to trust someone else to vote on behalf of me? So that is one major hurdle that we as blind people constantly face whenever elections are coming up. I'm pretty sure Jani also has a very interesting take on this. Uh, like my solution would be like, we don't have to look to Europe, we don't have to look to America. We can just look at a country like India. In certain states, in certain rural states, I'm not even talking about urban areas. I'm just talking about rural areas. There are voting machines which can be used by blind persons to vote on their own. So these things needs to start from government legislation itself. Like we as ordinary citizens, and all of you, I'm pretty sure, are connected to social media, and all of us are, in a sense, a social media generation. All of us, I think, must campaign vigorously for the rights of persons with disabilities, especially political rights, something very basic like voting, just so that all of us as persons with disabilities can vote independently and without any hindrance, like to our right to vote.
We actually received a question, Mr. Jalil, from the audience. The audience wants to know. So the audience says both the YMCA and Rotaract Colombo East participated in election monitoring. One of the monitoring criteria is access to persons with disability. If such a system exists, why hasn't someone filed a fundamental rights petition to the court to ensure that this system is reformed? Doesn't the legal framework permit this?
I think, Jani, you can answer this better.
Okay. So first thing is, let me pick up the question right then and there. Uh, Filing an FR, you might understand, has to have a considerable level of courage for an individual. So we are actually in a political culture where even the average person feel sometimes even after voting or casting their vote, their, whether they had true value for their vote in the regimes that they have brought to power or the regimes that they have sent home. So in such a context, do you really think a person with a disability who has million reasons to feel apathy towards the system and to feel despondent will come up and file an FR and go through all that humiliation to win a right? Of course, it is partly a responsibility of the persons with disabilities, and on the other hand, it is a responsibility of citizens, the specialists in the field of legal sort of reforms or legal or the experts of law to sort of empower a person or an organization uh, who's representing persons with disabilities. So that is in fact a civic duty that all of us have a part to play. And moving on to my fair share of legislature, uh, I will start from where the question asks about the driver's license for the deaf and hard of hearing people. Uh, so people bring up various excuses as to why this is difficult to be permitted, and one such is that they will not hear another vehicle arriving, or they will not receive any auditory cue about something that's sort of compromising their safety and the road safety overall. But if you are a sort of experienced driver, you know this is largely false, because a person with a hearing impairment, or a person who's deaf or hard of hearing, as they would like themselves to be called, uh, they have a sharper sense of vision and their reflexes are far better because they use sign language, and they have to have a synchronicity and sympathism in their body to sort of generate that language. So definitely it's not a big thing for them. But actually the structural issue comes up when they have to do the driving tests and when they have to be taught how to drive. Some people have learned it by themselves, and some people are trying to learn it in the formal way and like that. So the reason why there's no legislature is actually largely to be attributed to the lack of literacy among deaf and hard of hearing people who can come up with their own kind of language or initiative to form such legislature. As organizations, they demand for this, but that's not a solid commitment. So that is one reason. And if I move on to the political and voting rights paradigm, I'm a little bit happy to say that we have made a little bit progress, because from the situation that Ishan described, that what we have to face when we were casting our votes, now the election commission has come forward graciously to offer a more independent option, which is called the sleeve. There is a stencil or a sleeve kind of a thing where uh, in each election they will be uh, setting up, or they will be preparing those sleeves or stencils with which a blind person can use, and they can insert the ballot paper into the sleeve and look at the particular party symbol that they want to vote, as well as the preferential voting numbers, and they can cast their vote more independently. So that is one, because I know this because I am the leading convener of the election. Inclusive elections technical working group. So we have been lobbying for this, and on the other hand, there is a data collection going on regarding the voters who have accessibility needs. And to accommodate their requirements, the Gram Lidaris have been instructed to distribute this supplementary form along with the enumeration process. But unfortunately, this has come to a negative situation because the Gramalidharis don't feel the importance of accessibility enough, so much so that they have kept all those forms with them and given them just tokenistically to few households, where a fraction of the data is coming back to us. So that is a very unfortunate situation, but the attempts have been made, and uh, one giant step that is being currently planted in this regard, particularly on size of persons with disabilities, is there's going to be this long-standing disability rights bill, which has been reformulated for times again and times, and it is going to be tabled soon in the parliament, hopefully, and also another dedicated bill for sign language rights. So there is a certain level of headway in the legislative front, but as long as our attitudes remain in the sight of charity, such as persons with disabilities are always to be trimmed and kept like bonsai trees, where we see what we see as fit for them is the exact thing that should happen. Rather than believing in that, it is important to let them have the choice in their lives. So even the religions that all we follow sort of advocates for uh, bringing happiness and love to our neighbors, our friends, and people around us. And one of such steps is to let them have that choice in their lives. So legislature in that sense, has the role of facilitating those choices for persons with disabilities. And that is what is happening, and that is what needs to happen. And that is where the youth in our country has a major role as the sort of next generation of decision makers in this country. They have to take the responsibility and make sure that these legislature stands open for the choices of persons with disabilities themselves to make meaning to the slogan, nothing about us without us.
Thank you, Mr. Rukma. Thank you, Mr. Jalil. These are very informative answers. I'm going to move on into the next question we have for this evening. The corporate sector has come a long way on the lines of inclusion. However, more can be done to improve accessibility. What are some examples for the corporate sector making strides in this cause of accessibility, and what more can be done? Who would like to start off this conversation? Mr.
Ishan,
Jalil?
would you?
Shall I? Yeah, okay.
Yes, yes,
Fine.
Mr. Jalil.
So, corporate sector, of course, it has been a very interesting story to follow. Like, say, a few years ago, let's say about 10 years ago, there was an incident where, you introduced me as former president of Young Voices, a project done by Leonard Cheshire Disability UK,
Yes.
right? So I was, at that point I was the president of Young Voices back in 2011, and then we were in the process of organizing a job fair for persons with disabilities, and we made several calls to major corporates, and I'm not going to name any names here, but we called a certain corporate working in the communication sector, a major company, and one of our people involved, he was like, "Hi, we are interested. We are so and so. We are interested in doing a conducting a job fair for persons with disabilities. Are you interested in getting involved?" And the answer was, I'm pretty sure you will not expect this. The answer was, "No, we don't want to get involved in this because we don't want to make our company disabled." That was the answer, right? So, and mind you, this is from a very, very responsible player in the field of communications. Uh, but right now, the story is much positive. And Johnny has been constantly mentioning this word attitude. Attitudes have changed in a very positive way in terms of uh, the corporate sector, where I know major brands like MAS Holdings and also Dialog and many other brands, brandings, so on and so forth. They're all moving towards having more persons with disabilities uh, employed in their institutions, in their companies. Right? In terms of government sector, there is a circular which was passed in early 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, which ensures 3% inclusion of persons with disabilities uh, in uh, in employment. However, I know that in many government institutions, this is not happening like on the practical. But then there are very good efforts being taken. Now, say even someone like Janita to be employed in the presidential secretariat, the president's office as a translator, in itself is a giant step forward. So, corporates are moving in a very good direction. But then also, I must raise this issue of tokenism. Like, I know instances where corporates have employed persons with disabilities not because they are able, but because they are disabled. So they got the job not because of their ability, but because of their disability. Whereas what actually needs to happen is they need to get the job not because of their disability, but because of their ability. I would say, like, there are instances where corporates get involved in projects and, they are awarded, you know, yearly they are awarded the best CSR projects and so on. So sometimes getting persons with disabilities on board can be, I'm sorry to say this, just a CSR stunt. So that cannot happen. That's tokenism in its worst form. So what I would propose is, if employers, if the corporate sector can genuinely get involved, like the brands I mentioned earlier, because I know that they are genuinely employing like so many persons with disabilities and uplifting them out of poverty, etc. Uh, if corporate sector can get involved in a genuine way and uh, like just get rid of tokenism and actually help these persons with disabilities to overcome barriers and challenges in their lives, that will make a huge difference. That will truly uh, be remembered, like remembered by all as something which is a positive, is a positive development in Sri Lanka. So yeah, that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Jalil.
am pretty sure Johnny has another take on this.
Mr. Rukma, do you want to add anything to what Mr. Jalil said?
Yeah, very well. Uh, so let's now, as Ishan very correctly pointed out, uh, the corporate's involvement in mainstreaming disability inclusion and mainstreaming the accessibility in their mandate is largely relegated to tokenism and CSR. So if we delve into the reason why the corporates are not interested in this as much as they ought to be, one primary reason could be the misunderstanding on the cost of disability. I think I don't have to repeat what I said earlier. It's not necessarily a cost, but an investment for the future. So, moving on, one other reason they might have to have is to engage more labor force in their sort of work portfolio. I know if we take this in our country or national level, the common issue for employment paradigm in essence is not having sufficient skills or skilled individuals to meet the needs of the demand. So that is a common situation for everyone. That is not disability exclusive or something like that. But that same kind of notion can be twisted or can be flipped the other way around and figure out what's special, or what's the unique offering that the persons with disabilities can bring to the table for corporates. So there are so many. For example, persons with visual impairments can be very nimble and very proficient communicators who can be deployed as call center employees, because and that is something they can do while staying at home. In the new normal, we experience so many things that we go to work or we go to office to do, but we can actually do while we are at home, right? So this learning can be carried forward by the corporates to sort of revolutionize or modernize the way they think about including persons with disabilities. And On the other
Siba.
hand, And on the other hand, it is important that we, as young persons or young organizations, young person-led, youth-led organizations like YMCA and Rotaract, you can create one great reason for corporates to involve more in this if you would recognize their contribution in this regard. For example, so many forums and things recognize certain brand names, just like what Ishan mentioned, as the champions of disability inclusion in corporate sector. But if there is a platform as recognized as a collaboration of Rotaract and YMCA that offers awards recognizing these entities, they will have more reason to look into this, how they can make their workplaces accessible, how they can make their workplaces more inclusive for persons with disabilities, and not only as employees but even as customers. Because we might talk about the patronization in one of the next sections in our discussion. But even in this corporate sector, patronization happens a lot. So even the customers, I myself have experienced this. When we go to purchase a product, people don't feel, the organizations don't feel that a person with disability can afford and will have the same need. They look at us like we are uneducated, poor, impoverished people in unfortunate circumstances, which is not the case, which has been proved as not the case. So that understanding, if the corporate considers the customer as king, the same royal treatment should be extended to persons with disabilities all the same. So with that, we can actually start changing this trend for the better, and where the corporate can be more sensitive to the needs of those who have accessibility needs.
Thank you, Mr. Rukma. Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Actually, the audience asked the question, what can we as the youth do to prevent tokenism from taking place in the corporate sector? Well, as Mr. Jalil explained in his answer. And thank you, Mr. Rukma. You beautifully answered that in your responses. So thank you so very much for the very well-rounded responses that came from both of you. Thank you. We'll move on to the next couple of questions. Reminder to both our panelists, we are now dawning upon the last 15 minutes of our conversation. So we'll try and keep the answers a little shorter, but still as descriptive and analytical and informative as they have been thus far. Right. The sixth question for this evening is directed to you, Mr. Janit. What is patronization, and how does it stand in the way of total accessibility for the differently abled in both the local and international community?
Okay, let's first talk about patronization. The concept itself is pretty simple for most of you, I suppose. Um, say, the one question I can ask for you to understand what it is, if you would be patronized in some circumstances, how would you feel? For me, patronizing is very annoying. If someone comes and dotes on me, or if someone comes and sort of gives every comfort that they think I deserve without seeking my consent on it, that is definitely patronization, and that is kind of doting on a person. And if that happens to specifically a person with a disability who has accessibility needs, such as in the case of a wheelchair user who tries to maybe manage through a staircase, and someone all of a sudden comes and swoops him up on their hands and takes him up to the sort of up the stairs, where is his dignity? Would another fellow human be carried like to be carried like a sack of potatoes up a stairs without an ounce of dignity? And on the other hand, when an individual with a dignity tries to work something out in their workplace independently, if someone gets in the way and says, "No, no, 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 you can't do that. Don't do that. We will help you." How does that feel? I'm sure some of you at least might have been in circumstances where you need other people's attention and assistance. So, would you rather let those people ask you first and do that, or just come on their own and do it for you even when you feel it is annoying? I think your answer will be the first one. So, patronization works that way. And in local context, that is the attitude that most Sri Lankans have. And internationally, what I see patronization international context is when it comes to organizations. Organizations think, okay, persons with disabilities in such and such contexts are lacking opportunities for this and that, and they come up with their own initiative, with their own frameworks, with their own structures to give those opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities don't fit into the lifestyles of the receivers, the beneficiaries, which is a bad result of patronization. And I think that will give you a lot of food for thought. And with that, I will sort of finish that answer and let's see what comes out of it.
Thank you, Mr. Rukmal. I'm going to move on into the next question. So we come down to the last two questions of the evening. This is directed to both our panelists. The seventh question for the evening. Youth are the initiators and often the subject of reforms in both societal level and administrative levels. How can the youth be total allies in the journey in improving the accessibility for the benefit of millions of souls all over the world? Ms. Jalil, would you like to initiate the
Yeah, okay, okay.
conversation?
Sure, sure. So this is basically the $1 million questions in terms of this context. Because right now we are in the middle of a pandemic, as I told at the beginning of the discussion, and young people are locked up at home, right? All of us are locked up at home. So we are either working from home, and some people are not working from home. Some people are doing like they're like conducting their own businesses from home. So everything happens from home right now. Right? So right now, this is the best time that young people can use their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, right? All these exciting social media platforms. If young people can use those platforms and promote messages of inclusion, promote messages of the importance of accessibility for persons with disabilities. Because remember, back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Ajit C.S. Pereira fought for the rights of persons with disabilities in Sri Lanka and got a ruling from the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka saying that all public buildings must be accessible for persons with disabilities. So I think those kind, like there is a legal requirement for public buildings to be accessible. And like, those kind of positive things, those kind of wake up calls needs to come out frequently on social media. So, and we as young people, and like, I know Jani's organization, Enable Lanka Foundation, is working round the clock for accessibility for persons with disabilities. And what I would say is use all these social media platforms to generate positive messaging, uh, just so that everyone, while at home, uh, can kind of think, can think a bit more, and can make up their minds to empathize with persons with disabilities, so that young people can be the agents of change. They can start being the agents of change, because any revolution or any transformation in society always starts with young people. So young people can definitely be agents of change, and to do that, the best thing right now to be done is uh, aggressive social media campaigning, and also creating dialogues and discussions around issues which are felt like very sensitively by persons with disabilities. And in that context, I'm definitely very thankful again to the organizers of this discussion for doing something of this nature, because right now is the best time to talk about these stuff, and also not just to talk, but also to walk the talk.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. We're going to go into the last question of the evening. But before that, Mr. Rukmal, do you have anything to add to Mr. Jalil's response?
Okay, now that the time is of the essence, I'll be very brief in my response. Uh, I have five things, five specific things that I would propose the young persons who have joined us to get started with. One of the 21st century skills is the problem solving skills. So, to solve a problem, we have to know the problem. So, I invite you, first of all, to look at your App Store or Play Store or whatever application serving platform in your mobile, and locate this application called Be My Eyes. That's spelled as BEMYEIES. So EYES. So that is an application where the volunteers are playing a huge role in supporting the independence of visually impaired persons. So you can be one of those volunteers so that you will get random calls from people abroad, which are anonymous, of course, and they will let you help them with the challenges they come across, such as finding a building, finding a label, basic those things. So you can empathize with them by getting to know their problems. And number two is look for this application called Wheel Map. Now that everybody is at home, this Wheel Map application is designed to give directions for wheelchair users as to which places around you are accessible and which are not, so that they can independently go and do whatever they want and socialize in those spaces. So I invite you to look at the look around you and figure out the places where accessibility is compromised and where the accessibility is relatively better for a wheelchair user, and mark them in those maps. That will be itself a reflection to gauge how many spaces around are accessible and how many are not, and you will definitely feel that the majority are not, and you know what to do about that. And third is, now that Ishan mentioned it, there are a lot of organizations, youth-led organizations working towards mainstreaming disability inclusion. Join some of them. I'm not going to name names. You figure out, join some of them. While you are doing this great work in Rotaract and YMCA, join with them and bring what you have onto the table and see how you can fit into their agendas and make this accessibility a reality. And lastly, while you thrive in your organizations, try and include young persons with disabilities in your work, not as recipients always, but as active, involved partners. So even in your organizations, if you can give places for young people with disabilities to thrive along with you as members and support and work shoulder to shoulder with you, that is a great way of including them. So with those five things, I suppose our young people are all set to make the change that needs to happen in terms of disability inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Rukmal. Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Moving on to the last question of the evening. Society has a major role in creating an accessible environment for the differently abled. What do you think that society is already doing to increase accessibility? And what do you think they can improve to create a more accessible community? Who would like to initiate the response for this question, Mr. Jalil?
Yeah, so I'll be very brief on this. Uh, about 3 years ago, when I was working for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, we found out that 97% of Sri Lankans uh, believe that there needs to be voting rights for persons with disabilities. So that itself is a very, very positive indication about how our society really wants to help persons with disabilities and they feel for persons with disabilities. So that is sympathy, right? So my brief answer would be yes, there are so many sympathetic individuals out there. There is sympathy in society. Now is the time to transform yourself from being sympathetic to being empathetic. Being empathetic is when you get into the other person's shoes and you feel what the other person feels. So, for persons with disabilities, what the society needs to think of and what the society already is doing, yes, society is very sympathetic, yes, society is very helpful, but we do not want sympathy anymore. We want empathy. We want inclusion and not exclusion. We want recognition and not abandonment. So think about us as human beings and not just as objects of pity. Uh, if you can come to that kind of a mind frame of mind, definitely the sky is the limit.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Mr. Rukma, do you have anything to add to that response?
Okay, I think Ishan said the most important message, and I want to add to something that how the society has evolved. um, I think Sri Lanka is a country where the discourse around disability is framed largely on what they have done in the past, coming back to them as in the form of disabilities. So in different religions, these have been mentioned in different ways. And as progressive young individuals in this society, what the society has as responsibility is not to look at this gloomy aspect of disability. Instead, look at how Japanese people look at the persons with disabilities. Some Japanese people believe that the persons with disabilities have been sent to this world with such more severe challenges. On the one hand, to give the world a chance to reflect on themselves and value what they have as opposed to what they don't have. While those persons with disabilities can achieve better amidst all those challenges. And what does it make the persons with disabilities? Usually, persons with disabilities are seen as sources of inspiration pretty much everywhere. So, even if a person with disability is hired as an employee in a certain organization, usually they expect that person to be a role model of some sort to the rest of the employees and point them out. Okay, this person is doing this with his disability even, and why can't you perform better? Instead of that, look at persons with disabilities beyond those sources of inspiration, because they are in their own struggle to win the world. And what you can do is to help them break that stigma around them and let them participate in equal uh, level with everybody else. And that's the true meaning of inclusion that we all are envisioning for our future.
Thank you, Mr. Rukma. Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Before we conclude the session and move into the personal remarks you would want to leave with the audience who are tuning in today, we have a question from the audience. Let me read it out to both of you. The Bill on Access is basically a hope because for over a decade, successive governments have placed this at the bottom of their priorities. Ishan said access to public bills was given by a Supreme Court ruling. So why not activist groups focus on succession of face cases taken up in court to give full accessibility? Do you want me to rephrase
May
the question? Yeah, yes, Mr. Rukma, please.
Okay. So the reason being that we haven't had one too many allies to do that, because this has always been in the back burner because this was relegated to be disabled people's problem, a minority problem, just another minority problem. That minority did not have their own strong feet to stand on their own and fight for this issue. So we need allies. And if you guys are willing and ready to come on board, I'm sure we can push this off the back burners and get this front and center so that everyone, every Sri Lankan living with a disability will be served with the much earned justice in being active participants of the social change.
Thank you, Mr. Rukmal. When we normally end sessions like this, be it a YMCA Sri Lanka project, be it a Rotary Club of Colombo East project, we normally request our panelists to give us their own insight into the situation and leave the youth of tomorrow with a progressive message. I like to start off the closing remarks with Mr. Ishan Jalil. What would you like to leave the youth with as your final remark of the conversation we've had this evening?
So this has definitely been a very insightful discussion, and I'm privileged to be a co-panelist with Janita. So my message to all of you who are watching this on Facebook Live is give us the opportunity. Disability is not inability.
Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Mr. Rukmal, what would you like to leave the youth of tomorrow with as your final remarks on the conversation we've had this evening?
I think on the one hand, this is kind of a evening or an event where the society is trying to weave into this discourse the accessibility, disability, and all that. And at the end of the topic that you have chosen, I saw if we sort of lead the way in accessibility, the disability won't exist. So this is the end goal that people are perceiving as as the end result of this kind of awareness sessions. So let's work together, be an ally for the persons with disabilities, and do it with your conscience, not for tokenisms or goodness sake. Do it with your conscience, and let's make this happen together.
Thank you, Mr. Rukmal. Thank you, Mr. Jalil. Once again, on behalf of the organizing committees headed by the YMCA Sri Lanka and the Rotary Club of Colombo East, I would like to thank both of you for taking time out of your lives to be here with us, enlighten the youth, inform us about what our priorities are when it comes to situations and issues like this. It was very informative. I want to thank you both so very much. And before we conclude, I want to thank again Mr. Jagan Jeevaraj, the General Secretary of YMCA Vaticlo, for supporting this endeavor immensely, and Ms. Diane Selvamalar, who is with us, who was with us in this event, transmitting everything that was spoken. Thank you so very much. We were able to make this an inclusive session at the end of the day, and that is what counts as organizers for us to do. My final remarks of of the conversation we had this evening to all of you who are watching this with us live and will be looking at this recording later on Facebook. We heard amazing words being spoken tonight. I wrote some of them down because I want to repeat them at the end of this conversation. We heard phrases like progressive realization. We heard phrases like lack of literacy with regard to this issue. We heard the word tokenism. We heard stigmatization. These are things that you might not be aware of. And it's time for you to look at this conversation and not glorify this situation. It's not something to be glorified. It's something to be empathetic about. It's something where you have to understand, look, right now society is traveling in a trajectory where we are prioritizing our selfish desires of so-called success, which is a bubble that is created for us. And we are stuck in this bubble and we are forgetting humane values. And the forgetfulness on our part is leading to trauma, is leading to so much of agony with regards to so many people. Most of these stories unheard of unless we have conversations like this, unless we have people coming forward and working actively towards causes like this. I'd once again like to thank the organizing committees, the YMCA Sri Lanka and the Rotary Club of Colombo East for choosing this topic of conversation and informing everyone in the audience who will be watching it live and who will be watching the recording of this session, for telling them what their responsibility is. It's not time for sympathy. It's never time for sympathy. It's for empathy and taking action towards creating equality and equity for every single human being. Because a life is lived to be happy, it's lived for a purpose, and every individual in society it's important for everyone to have a purpose in life. And it is your responsibility as our social responsibility, a collective social responsibility, to make sure that everyone has that purpose. Thank you so very much for joining us. A very good night to all of you.